Inside a shallow reef, archaeologists from the Turks and Caicos National Museum race to examine the remains of a ship, hoping this is the wreck they have sought for more than a decade. They're looking for an illegal slave trader that sank here in 1841 near the end of its voyage to Cuba. The ship had run aground while attempting to evade authorities in the dangerous Turks Island passage. As time passed, the slave ship was all but forgotten until 1992, when it was rediscovered during a search for local artifacts in the United States.
We were looking for what had happened to artifacts that had been taken from the Turks and Caicos 100 years ago and sold to museums primarily in the U.S. We ran across a letter that indicated a lot of the artifacts had ended up in the Smithsonian. And one of the entries in this inventory was 2 African idols found on the last slave ship wrecked in the Caicos Islands.
The mystery ship turned out to be the Trouvadore, a Spanish slave trader that had left West Africa a month earlier with a captive human cargo and an inexperienced crew. In an ironic twist of fate, the smugglers foundered in British territory, where slavery and the slave trade had long been outlawed. The nearly 200 Africans that survived the journey were rescued and freed, given food and clothing, and apprenticed in local trades. Dr. Keith and his team were hopeful they could locate the Trouvadore wrecksite. The first full-scale expedition was launched in August 2004. Unfortunately, they were forced to evacuate when Hurricane Francis threatened after a day and a half on site. When they returned 5 days later, the seas were rough and underwater visibility was very limited. In spite of the poor conditions, one of the survey teams sighted the remains of a wooden wreck. On closer inspection, the exposed pieces of the ship suggested it might have been too lightly built to have transported 300 human beings across the Atlantic Ocean. Deeper testing would be required, but since this was just a survey mission, they would have to wait before they could explore it any further. In 2006, the team headed back to East Caicos. After several days of excavating, massive timbers were exposed, and the archaeologists realized that the wooden ship was far bigger than they had previously estimated. Each portion of the wreck was carefully measured and recorded. Before they left, they recovered the exposed wreck with sand to protect it from the elements and from vandals. In July 2008, the team will embark on a third expedition to confirm the identity of the wooden wreck. Recovered artifacts were taken to the museum on Grand Turk for conservation and analysis. Trouvadore and its story have great significance, well beyond the shores of this small West Indian island. The 1841 incident occurred during one of the least understood eras in the history of the African slave trade, the 50-year period after it had been banned, during which it continued to flourish. Historical research is continuing in many countries. In the meantime, DNA studies will help establish the genetic relationship of the Turks and Caicos population to the Trouvadore survivors and help determine their ancestors' origins in Africa.
It's a key for me as cultural officer to really ignite the spark of cultural awareness. For too many years, we have been a part of Jamaica, part of the Bahamas. Now is our time to have our own identity, and I think the key factor here is that one ship, the Trouvadore.